When I initially started researching for this video, getting my notes, my logs, starting to write the script, I was excited. I was ready to prove them wrong, okay, especially after the little YouTube questionnaire I put out, and all these little peoples were like, oh, the D20 is the best one, it's the simplest, it's the whatever, and I was like, there's no way. We're all just nostalgia baited, we're all just stuck in it, and they're all wrong. And I slowly came to the conclusion that it was actually me that was wrong. Kind of, okay? I want to put a big caveat on that, alright? I was kind of wrong, because frankly, I'm never completely wrong, obviously. But in this one, I had to concede at least most of the ground I was trying to take. So to give you some backstory, I've been playing board games for my entire life. I have a pretty heavy board game family. Didn't get into D&D too much until probably like 2.5-ish years ago, something like that. I always wanted to play but couldn't find my group and finally got to play and enjoyed it. Loved it. It was the time of my life. But I always had a problem with it, and that was that I sucked at rolling, okay? A lot of it was my fault, I understood this. The dice gods and me just don't get along, okay? I'm really good at rolling 1s and 2s and 3s and 4s and occasionally 5s, and that's usually where I peak out. I very rarely do good on my rolls. I'm just kind of known for it. And I thought to myself, there's gotta be a better way to do this. Okay, if I'm gonna sit here and I'm gonna be this masterful adventurer, ninja, or whatever the case my character is, and he's failing to like climb a 5-foot wall, okay, this is bull shenanigans. All right, I'm done with it. I'm tired of it. And there had to be a better method. There just had to be. And so I started doing my research and, looking through different things, looking through different options. And while I found a bunch of them, I just kept crawling back to the D20. Now that being said, I don't want to make this video an hour and a half long of me explaining every different resolution system that's ever been invented and attempted and used, but rather some of the ones that I found most intriguing and that at least I think might be some of the cooler options. Also some of the options that, for me personally, would probably be better than the D20. So the first alternative resolution system I want to talk about is one that was actually recommended in the comments of the YouTube kind of community questions that I posted. By the way, if you don't pay attention, I would. There's a chance you can get into the video because typically when I ask those questions, it is relating to a future video. But nonetheless, I digress. It comes from our man Ronan Mazizon. I don't know how that's pronounced, and I apologize, Ronan. But Ronan says, I think the D20 for D&D is too iconic to replace. It is perfectly simple and easy to understand, so people get it quickly. We'll talk about those points later. However, if it had to be replaced, I'd say use the Genesys dice system. It allows for variation in the results. A character can succeed in an action, but also cause a world of problems at the same time. Now, if you're like me, prior to reading that comment, you had never heard of this Genesys dice system ever, and I decided to look into it. And I honestly love it. I think it's very cool, very interesting, and to give you the short of it, you have this, these dice right here that I'll put an image of, and you're going to have your good dice and your bad dice. Your good dice have sides that range from, hey, you kind of succeeded, to, hey, you really succeeded, to maybe just a blank, and then there's your bad dice that will range from, again, another blank to a, hey, you kind of messed up, and a, hey, you really messed up. And the long story short of it is that you're going to add up your successes and failures on the dice and then combine them to see how good you did, right? It's not that crazy of a system. With this system, I found a few really good things that I really, really liked about it. One, your character being good at something lets you visually see that you're good at it. One of the issues that I have with the kind of typical Dungeons & Dragons D20 system is whenever you're proficient at something or you're really, really good at, we'll use an example of, let's say, doing some kind of like leap over a canyon, something like that, right? If you're really, really strong and really, really good, you're going to have some kind of plus to this check, right? You're going to have a +6 because you're really athletic and you can run fast, so you clear it easy, right? So whatever you roll, add 6, call it a day. This one, well, because you're really athletic, you might get handed 4 dice, and then the gap that you have to clear might be a 2-die gap. So you're like, okay, it's very easy to comprehend. All right, I'm rolling 4 dice to hopefully beat these 2 bad dice. You can always still lose, you can always still succeed, so it has that variability in it while feeling a little more, at least visually controlled. Now, the key word that I threw in there was visual clarity, because at the end of the day, it's not so clear. Reason being, the way this system works is it's not just you get to roll 4 dice to the 2 dice of the problem. It's your 4 dice versus their 2 dice, but then also if you're, let's say, trying to, stealthily walk up to someone. Well, it was raining yesterday, so we're going to add in this random d6 black dice because it's a little harder to walk quietly in the water. All right, well, I actually have these special shoes that allow me to walk on top of the water. Okay, well, here's a green dye or white dye or whatever the color is that we're going to add into your side because you have this thing now. And that's not even counting the proficiency dice that are, I forget what color, but they're like D12s, and it gets a little convoluted, all right? That's basically what I'm getting into. Initially, it seems very simple, but once you get into some very intense moments with a lot of variabilities and a lot of things adding up, it gets a little absurd, as opposed to, the original, hey, roll a single die, add a number, and there it is, there's your final answer. So while I love this system, I cannot in good faith count it as better than the D20 for the average person when it just gets a little too saucy, a little too fast. Now, this next set of games or resolution systems, I'm basically going to call dividing the 20. I'm talking about the systems that do things like 2d10, 3d6, maybe even 5d4. And for those of you kind of non-stat heads out there, the goal of these systems and the goal of these games is typically to get rid of a lot of the swinginess and variability and make it a little more controlled. Now, for those of you that aren't stat heads out there, the reason it is controlled a lot of the time stems from the reasoning that if you look at this graph here, this is a D20, right? When you roll it, it is a even 5% chance across the board to hit any of those numbers. Whereas when you roll 2d10s, as you can see, it creates a little pyramid shape because you are way more likely to roll that middle number than you are to roll 2 nat 1s and get that bottom resolution in that worst case scenario. Which is why some people will prefer your 2d10s over a d20. But I also understand where the fun comes from, okay? There's a few cons that come with this. It's not perfect. For one, it's a little more convoluted. All right, at the end of the day, you're having to roll 2 dice, add 2 numbers, and that just adds to difficulty, at least to some small extent. The other side of it is some of the most fun parts of D&D can come from the nat 1s and the nat 20s, okay? Sure. I get it more than most people that nat 1s are very frustrating, very infuriating. For those of you that haven't seen the clip, the first time I ever touched Roll20, I went ahead and tried to roll a D200 because I didn't know if it could go higher than a D20, and it let me. You want to know what I rolled on that D200? A 1. The literal lowest possible option, okay? That is how ridiculous my rolls can be sometimes. That being said, it's hilarious. That made for a very memorable moment that I haven't forgotten years later because of how absurd that was. It also, in the Dungeons & Dragons system, lets you have the chance to do the impossible. With 2d10s, yeah, it's still possible to roll 2d10s and get that critical success and do this crazy thing you were trying to do. It is way less likely. It's a 1 in 10 on 2 dice, which if you don't know math, that makes a 1% chance. Versus D&T, you always have a 5% chance to just succeed. Now, this depends on your DM. Maybe with the nat 20, they're still going to make you fail. But you nat 20 it, right? They might make you fail, but way less aggressively than it might have been otherwise. So, while 2d10s is probably statistically, I think, the better option, it does probably make for less fun in most situations. Now, the dividing the dice section covers a lot of other TTRPGs. There is one last type I haven't talked about, and that's going to be your dice pools, all right? For things like Vampire the Masquerade, and maybe you haven't played these before, but basically you're going to get a pool of dice, kind of similar to how the Genesys system works, but not quite. You'll get a pool of dice, and typically it'll be D6s, or maybe sometimes better, worse, whatever. I don't know the system perfectly, okay? But for the most part, you're going to get a pool of D6s depending on how good you are at this thing. You will roll them, and then anything 4 or higher will be a success. So the more you have, obviously the more successes you are likely to get. And then there will be some kind of success check you have to hit. Now this system, I again like a lot, for a lot of the same reasons I like the Genesys system. And I actually think, genuinely, This is probably a better variation of the Genesys system. While again, I personally like the Genesys system because I appreciate rolling a bunch of different type of dice because it makes the dopamine receptors in my brain kick into high gear, rolling a bunch of d6s is a lot easier to comprehend. And on top of that, you get the pool thing of getting to roll a bunch of dice, which is honestly just fun for most people. After you roll, you see how you do, and yeah, there's different modifiers and things and systems in place, and it's a lot more convoluted than how I'm making it, but we're going to leave it at that for now. And these dice pool systems, I think, can be very, very fun. Now, while I understand that these dice pool systems can be very, very fun, and I think they're very awesome and very unique and very cool, I see the flaw in them, which again is the same thing as the Genesys, of it just gets a little more convoluted than something like the D20 system does. It is so hard to argue that having a +3 roll your D20 is harder than, oh, okay, roll 66s, see which ones are successes, and you're going to have to count your successes to beat the success check. I'm not saying it's the most complicated thing in the world, and most tabletop RPG players are going to be comfortable with it, but to give the example of introducing someone to a new system or introducing someone to tabletop role-playing games might not be the best way to go about it. And not only that, but there's also some dice pool systems that do get very interesting and very weird. You're going to be rolling different types of dice for different things and different editions, and then you're going to maybe be like betting them in the sense of saying, okay, I'm going to put these dice forward for this check, and then I have these dice to use for this check over here. Those systems get even more convoluted in the dice pool system, but again, overall, it's just hard to compete with the simplicity of the D20. So to finally get into it, the D20. Why does it reign supreme? Well, frankly, for a few reasons. One, as I have mentioned through every single thing so far, it's simplicity. It's honestly so hard to argue it, okay? You have your character stats, you have a +4 to jumping, or a +4 to athletics, rather, would be the proper terminology. Roll your D20 and add a 4. I'm going to imagine most people can look at the number on a D20 and add 4. It's typically not that complicated, all right? Whereas all the other systems are a lot harder. It's a hard thing to beat. Not only that, there's the nostalgia factor, okay? At the end of the day, it's hard to argue that people love the thing that they grew up with, or the thing that they initially learned. And because most people get introduced with a D20 system, most people are going to gravitate towards that system. They know it, they're comfortable with it, it's what they have always done their whole time doing it. Now finally, the biggest and final point is big die equal cool. Okay, the variability is just so hard to argue. Whenever you have your fun Dungeons and Dragons story, right, your cool one, like, you know, you're around a bunch of other D&D nerds and nerdettes that are just, you know, into D&D, and you're sharing your stories, what do you share? Is it a story where you rolled a consecutive 10 5 times in a row and succeeded the check enough to get it done, but just barely, and it really, you know, you kind of mundanely did it? No, not at all. You share that moment where you nat 20'd that backflip off a falling building to land on the dragon and backstab him for a critical hit and take him down in a moment. All right? You talk about that moment where your character was walking up a staircase, and because you rolled a nat 1, you fell down, breaking your arm as your team started a combat over here that you now have to do without a left arm or something, right? Those are the Dungeons and Dragons stories we all remember and love, and you just get so few of those when it comes to using those other systems because they are so controlled. So it's just so hard to argue. Long story short, I admit my defeat. As many problems as I have with the D20, and as many times as I've wanted to throw this thing through my window, never to see it again, never to touch another one, it's hard to argue how good they are. And it's hard to argue how good its system is. And with all of its flaws, honestly, comes the best moments. And that's why it's really hard to get rid of it. So, as you can see, I have to sadly agree with the majority here of people that said the D20 is their preferred way of doing it. Oh, it's upsetting, frankly, because I wanted some other magical system to come with me away and take me off my feet and bring me to the promised lands, but it just isn't the case this time. So I hope y'all enjoyed. I hope y'all learned something. I hope for those of you that maybe have considered trying a new system, I haven't turned you away from doing it. I still highly recommend trying the other systems, okay? Because like I talked about, I think some of the other systems are my preferences, and I do appreciate them for their reasons that they can be appreciated. But I understand and I fully see for the masses why this son of a goddamn piece of shit die right here will forever and ever reign supreme. I hope y'all enjoyed, and I will see you all in the next one. Peace out.